information at the right time, at the right place, in the right way to the right person. Well, sounds easy, but it's not always that easy. So we reach out to computational systems, to algorithms that help us in doing so, and we encounter algorithmic curation actually on a daily basis in search engines, on social media feeds, job platforms, on e-commerce sites, applications, when we search for apps, and so on. And also in the music domain. Just consider that on an average online music platform, we have access to roughly 50 million music tracks. And also here we need to filter to get to the one piece or the one artist that we're really interested in the very moment. And just as a starting point, when you think, she's researching in music and music is entertainment, that's a lot of fun, but should we really care about this sector? Just want to give you a reminder that the digital music market is really huge, with more than 11 billion revenues per year. It's a huge job market with lots of different stakeholders, not only the artists around. And actually, the recommender systems are strong business drivers in the field at the moment. So it's a very issue to research in this field. So in general, if you're not familiar with recommender systems in terms of how do they really work, what is the computational problem behind that? Recommendation can be viewed as a matrix completion problem, where you can consider a two-dimensional matrix of ratings of people, how much they enjoy or don't enjoy a specific item. So you have users and items, and have, for music in most cases, like or not, you don't like those, but there are also possibilities that you have a 5-scale rating and so on. This matrix is typically a sparse matrix because not every user is rating every item that exists. Just consider the 50 million music tracks. That's really difficult if you want every user to rate all of those. Actually impossible. And the prediction problem is to interpolate ratings that are not present in the original matrix based on what you already know. So from users and items, you wanted to interpolate the rating. To phrase it in a bit of simpler terms is, we want to predict what people like based on what they have already liked. And of course, it's more interesting to learn something about items that are where you don't know anything about before. It's easy to predict something on what you already know. One prominent approach to do so is with collaborative filtering. One example, you have 2 users that are similar users because both users listen to the same albums, one by the Beatles, one by Rolling Stones. So you can consider those as similar users. And the first user, in addition, listens to an album by Bob Dylan. And based on this information, this album by Bob Dylan is then recommended to the second user. Of course, we know that's a very simplified version of collaborative filtering, because you don't only have 3 albums out there, and you do not only have two users. So in reality, it's more complex to get the right thing to the right person at the right time. And yeah, that's the basis for the talk. So something specific in the music market also exists in some other markets, but it's present in the music market, is that it's a so-called long tail market. What does this mean? Maybe you're more familiar with the term superstar phenomenon. When we consider the popularity curve, and we have such a curve here on the right-hand side of the slide, where artists are ranked concerning their popularity, we can see there is a short head of very popular artists or very popular items, and there's a long tail of in the popularity curve of items that are in comparison far less popular. And this is something we can actually make use of when we want to make recommendations to users. This term, it's called mainstreaminess approach. That's a term that a colleague came up with, Markus Schädel. We consider that those people, there are people that really prefer just the items in the shorthand, so they follow the mainstream, so that are the more mainstreamy people, and people that are more inclined to listen to items that are in the long tail. And so the idea is that we use the collaborative filtering approach, but do a context pre-filtering. What does it mean? We take into consideration to which group of users people belong to according to mainstreaminess, and we can make 3 groups: high mainstreamy people, mid mainstreamy people, low mainstreamy people. And then for each group separately, we apply the collaborative filtering approach by assuming that high mainstream people are more alike and low mainstream people more alike, and so on. Yet we are confronted with challenges when we want to do so, because it's not as easy as it seems in the first place. When we consider the music market, there are global superstars, but also local superstars. So an artist that is maybe on a global perspective not so popular might be one of the superstars locally in a specific country. So learning from this, we have also to consider that we have to group users based on the country where they're from or where they're in, so that these preferences are also considered when we make recommendations. Then another thing comes in, and I want to show you what the global superstars could be like. We have here on the right-hand side a list of 30 artists that are like the most popular artists on a global scale, based on a data set on music listening events that is very highly used in music recommendation research, the LFM1B data set. And you see it's headed by the Beatles, so I assume that many people will actually agree just from a gut feeling, yes, those are very popular overall and over the years, and also Radiohead, Pink Floyd, and so on. The challenge comes in when we consider the top artists for selected countries and make a comparison. How different or how similar are those lists of artists? And I've just plotted here the top 10, I think, of 3 different countries: Finland, Italy, and Turkey. And I marked those artists in the green background that actually also appear in the top 30 globally. And we see that actually when I say, well, maybe some countries are different to the global scale, for Italy and Turkey, we actually see that these are more or less the same artists that also appear in these countries as they are the top artists on the global scale. So what was I talking about? When you have a look on Finland, there's actually only one band in the top 10 that also appears in the top 30 globally, which is Metallica. If you have a look on the specific artists that are in the top 10 of Finland, and if you're very familiar with this kind of artists, maybe, you will find out these are actually all of them are heavy metal artists. So something specific for Finland is that heavy metal artists are far more popular within the country than on a global scale, and also compared to other countries. So what do we learn from that? Well, when we group people per country, and also when we consider what is mainstream in a specific country, we actually have to consider the difference that what is mainstream globally is maybe not the same as what's considered the mainstream in a country population, and this may also be different from country to country. This means when we apply context pre-filtering for recommendation, we have to actually delve into more detail. So we could apply collaborative filtering on a global basis, just compare all users globally that we have in a data set or in the community on the same basis. We could split all users that we have in a data set into 3 groups based on what is considered mainstream on a global perspective into high, mid, or low. We could group those users even more specifically by considering also the country where the users come from. So only considering high mainstream users from Austria with other high mainstream users from Austria and high mainstream users from Brazil, only with high mainstream users from Brazil, and so on. But actually, that's not the end of the story, because we have seen on the other slide that what is considered mainstream globally is not necessarily the same mainstream in a specific country. Differentiate further and define what mainstream a specific country is based on only considering the users in this specific country, and making this grouping into 3 groups based on what is considered in the specific country, which will be different for Austria, different for Brazil, different for the Netherlands, and so on. Sounds good so far, but yet another challenge comes in because they're globally dominant superstars. So when we look back to the slide where I mentioned all the artists that we have, and some artists actually seem to appear everywhere. So there are artists that are relevant in every country. So it's actually difficult to find out what are the local specificities, which are the important ones. So we have to weight the popular global superstars to a lower degree to find out what actually defines the country-specific. And so we needed had to find out how do we weight those global superstars to a lower degree, and actually to find out what the country-specific mainstream is. So in short, it's all not as straightforward as it may seem to begin with. So we need to group per country. We have to consider whether the global or the country population is used as a reference for mainstreaminess. And also we have to consider how to weight the global superstars to a lower degree. When I say not as straightforward as it may seem, we could have done it maybe right away in 2 seconds and everything's done, but it took us quite some years to move forward step by step to come to what I present in the next slides. So what we specifically researched on were we tried out, actually it's trying out, several ways, several methods how we could define mainstreaminess and how to weight the global superstars to a lower degree so that we could actually find out what the country-specific profile is. And 2 approaches were quite successful. The one is based on symmetrized Coulter-Gleiberg divergence, where we considered the distributions of between the global and the profiles, preference profiles, and users' preference profiles, but also in a different way for where not the global preference was the baseline, but the country-specific baseline as a comparison. And we also used a rank order correlation according to Kendall's Tau to find a way to rank actually these what people listen to in the mainstreaminess, to define what mainstreaminess is in a specific country globally, and how the user's profile compares to what is listened to in a specific country or globally, to know in which group actually a user belongs. And some results of what we came up with in finding the recommendations. When we use just the common collaborative filtering approach, you have the results what we use as the baseline, so all users together. And then where we applied the fine-grained approaches with the context pre-filtering based on country and the different mainstreaminess definitions, so globally or country specific. And what was very interesting to see actually for both approaches, so we have the distribution-based approaches on the left-hand side and rank-based approaches on the right-hand side, that the results show that for the low mainstreaminess group, so people that have a very specialized music taste, particularly with lower comparison points, what other users look to or what other users prefer, we could find that we have lower error rates for those, and it's actually the user group which is most difficult to serve, because those people that listen to the global superstars all the time, that follow the mainstream, there are a lot of users out there, and it's in comparison easier to serve those. But the low mainstreamy people are those that are really don't benefit so much from recommender systems currently because of their specialized music taste. And we were really glad to see that with our approach, that we could achieve results that specifically those low mainstreamy people could be well served. The differences between the approaches, so distribution-based approaches and rank-based approaches, are not so huge, but still with the rank-based approach seem to work best with the specific data set that we use. Oops, there. But what we found is that we delved in more detail what the mainstreamy profile of different countries is, and we see it's very different. So I have here 3 examples that show that. So we have here for every country the popularity curve on a global basis, which is the black line, and then we have plotted for each country the corresponding popularity in the respective country. And we see for the UK that actually the popularity of the different artists is actually more or less in correspondence with the global mainstream. For Finland, which is the one in the middle, we see that somehow there appears a second line when we consider the dots. So there seems to be a parallel mainstream, a country-specific mainstream, in addition to the global mainstream. And considering that a lot of metal bands are so popular in Finland, it can be assumed that those metal bands are really the highly popular, those that are ones that appear on as the country-specific mainstream. And then there are also countries like Japan, where actually from the visualization we don't really see any concrete pattern. So we at the moment call it like the popularity in the specific country is somehow a diffuse deviation from the global mainstream. And so it's also very likely that in different countries the different approaches work differently, well or not so well. So what do we learn between the lines? That actually user groups with different music preferences are unequally served with current systems. Users from different countries are unequally served, and local artists are generally not so well represented when it comes to the thing that whether they are recommended or not with generic approaches. And overall, we see that as algorithmic curation in such a domain shapes the entire digital ecosystem with all stakeholders involved, it may create unequal opportunities. And that's not the end of the story, because I think that's a challenge that has to be solved. And that's why I'm here with that's why I started this position here in Utrecht, because my future work will go into this direction, and I hopefully can give a talk with results on that, how we can minimize this problem. So thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you for the talk. Very interesting topic. So let me see if there's someone who has a question. Then I think the easiest thing is just to unmute your microphone and speak up. So okay, since I don't see a question yet. Let me maybe start with a question. So I guess these recommender systems are, I mean, so far as I see, you're more doing fundamental research on what different approaches could be to do these recommender systems, rather than have a software which is ready to be implemented for Spotify and so on. Do I see this correctly?
No, I don't have that ready, because Spotify and so on, they have that ready.
So can you say something maybe on what they do? What?
That's the business secret. That's the problem. Those companies they're dealing with recommender systems, they have their own research departments. They, of course, do a lot of also fundamental research, but also go into the direction what they can apply directly. From outside, as an academic, it's difficult to go like you have to cooperate with the company that they can try it out really directly in space with the users. What we can do from outside is do the fundamental research with different approaches and hope when something is really successful, like works well, that it's adopted in practice. Although we don't know from outside what exactly is adopted and what's not.
So you have a lot of handcrafted dimensions, so to say. Let's say country. I mean, country sounds very natural. It's maybe one dimension that already exists in the data, right? There's a label. This person is from Germany, or this person is from the Netherlands. But the two of us, I think you're also German, right? Oh no, Austrian.
I'm Austrian.
Austrian. Okay. So maybe they would label us as Austrian, or they label us as German, but then they mislabel us as Dutch, right? And they're like, oh, well, usually Dutch people in the Netherlands, they really like Sonntag mit Lubach, but actually we don't speak Dutch, so we don't like it. And what I want to say, it's in a way still just one possible dimension, and so often, I work in algorithms, and what we do is we take the users, we take what they liked, what they disliked, and it's more of a, there are a lot of techniques which try to figure out by themselves some dimensions which may be not so visible, that may not be already there. I mean, age, country, these these are labels that we have, right? But it could be that someone belongs to a certain type of subgroup. Maybe someone likes metal, right? Especially with music, culture is very important.
That's actually, that I'm also working on at the moment, especially looking in more detail who are these people that are considered the low mainstreamy people. How can these be categorized? Because people that listen to the long tail of music it's a very long tail, so it's very broad and it's very generalized. And so we delve in more detail what groups are in there, which subgroups are in there, and we look in more detail what actually audio features characterize the music that they listen to group those. And as you said, country is something that is specified. It's a label. It can also be a mislabel. In this case, in this data set that we used, that's used a lot, it's a self-report of country, which could also be wrong. And it's also, maybe you wouldn't know, should you put the Germany, or should you say Netherlands, or actually maybe your music preferences are far more aligned to Finnish music taste. So that's another idea where we think it would be useful to consider, maybe I would get the label Austrian or Dutch, but my music preference is so much UK-like. That's actually based on my listening events, using the listening events to predict which country I'm from, or where I'm more aligned with. And this could also be in turn used like as a tailoring, like, okay, I'm Austrian, I live in the Netherlands, but I want to get music that I really like, but it has some more Brazilian touch in it based on what people in Brazil what they listen to. So there are lots of possibilities how to use those. And as you mentioned, some labels are out there. What they mean is a different thing. And what we call mainstreaminess is, we actually don't claim that it really measures mainstreaminess. What is mainstreaminess? But it's a term that we use for what we're doing.
So maybe a personal question. Are you belonging to the short head or to the long tail?
I would say I belong to the long tail, but okay. I don't know to which part in the long tail. It's difficult to specify.
I see. Okay, so I don't see any more questions, and we also run out of time. So maybe a very last question. Could you recommend us some song that we can listen to when we're working from home? What would be your recommendation? You can maybe type it in the chat, and then we can Google it and listen to it in remembrance of that talk.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't have to mention it. I just type it in.
Yes.
It helps in working, I think. For working motivation.
What a feeling.
Yeah.
Is it that song like what a feeling?
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. Hmm?
Yes.
Okay, then I know the song. Okay. By
That's
whom?
actually a short-haired song, I would say.
Yeah, I guess so. But if I know it, it must be a shorthand because I'm not very knowledgeable. Okay, then thanks a lot. And let's all give a last applause. And then I guess I see you every now and then in the office. Otherwise, as everyone, see you next week in the seminar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.